Good evening, everybody, and welcome to the Hybrid Working Culture and Wellbeing in the New Normal digital event hosted by the CMI Scotland Board. My name's Claire, one of the event managers at CMI. I'll shortly be handing over to Phil Hanford and Ian Tinnerswood from CMI Scotland to begin this evening's event, along with our guest speaker, Kirsten Oswald MP. If you have any questions during the session, you can ask them using the chat box to the right of your screen, and we'll answer as many as we can during the evening. Today's event is being recorded and will be shared with you tomorrow for those that book to attend. And the recording will also be available on the CMI website and YouTube channel. Now over to Phil and Ian to begin the event. Thank you.
Thanks, Claire. Thanks for the introductions, and welcome everyone to the CMI Scottish Region Hybrid Working, the New Normal. Myself and Ian are both experienced charge managers and members of the CMI Scotland Board. Kirsten has kindly given up her time from Westminster, and I can imagine she's very busy at this point, to give her insights into hybrid working and some of her experience from Westminster and how that works. And collectively, there will be 3 questions presented to the panel. These have been pre-selected based on feedback given, and we will be hopefully giving you some insight into our experience. So without further ado, I'll hand you over to Ian, who will introduce himself and Kirsten.
Yeah, hi, good evening, everyone. Just before we go too much further, I'd like to take the opportunity to quickly introduce Kirsten, Phil, and myself. So Kirsten represents the constituency of East Renfrewshire, where she lives with her family, and prior to entering political life, Kirsten worked as a Human Resources Director. So in her political career, she's acted as the SNP's spokesperson for the Armed Forces and Veterans, was appointed as its first female business convener, and she's now the SNP's Westminster Group Deputy Leader and spokesperson for Women and Equalities. We're absolutely delighted to have her with us tonight. So also with us, obviously, is Phil. Phil Hanford's a chartered manager, member of the CMI Scotland Board. He's a professionally registered mechanical engineer with the Institute of Mechanical Engineers. And Phil's got over 30 years experience acquired through 2 long career paths, the first in the Royal Navy's Fleet Air Arm and the second in the UK's railway industry, where he's currently delivering engineering solutions and business support as a performance engineer for Serco Caledonian Sleeper Limited. Finally, myself. So my name's Ian Tinnerswood. I'm also a chartered manager and member of the CMI Scotland Board, and I'm an associate with Mott MacDonald, who are a global engineering management and development consultancy based in the UK. So my background is civil engineering, and I've worked across a range of sectors, both in the UK and overseas, but have spent most of the last 10 years or so in the healthcare sector, where I'm involved in leading large multidisciplinary teams in the provision of technical advice and design management services to the NHS on large healthcare infrastructure projects. So as Phil and Claire have already mentioned, we'll be initially addressing 3 questions from the subject of hybrid working that were submitted in advance, before taking questions from the floor that have been submitted through the chat box. Throughout the session, our aim will be to highlight our thoughts and give some practical examples from our experience that may help you on this journey to embrace the new normal of hybrid working as people go back to the office. So Phil, I think we're ready for our first question, so over to you.
Thanks, Ian. Hopefully I haven't got some background noise coming through. I was conscious there was a little bit of buffering whilst you were speaking there, Ian. It's probably my set. Okay, first question posed to the panel is, what challenges do managers and leaders have in response to hybrid working, and what are the barriers? I'll open up my commentary first, and I'll look for Ian probably to give some insight and follow-up. The way I look at this now is hybrid, been here probably for 2 years or so, and what I've realized is not one size fits all. It doesn't fit every business. Obviously, we've got retail, we've got all sorts of jobs where people actually need to be out there doing things. So I think that each organization will have to look individually at their own strategies now and whether a hybrid business model would work for them. I would imagine most businesses will need to develop some form of hybrid policy. It will probably impact on most organizations, if not all. I would say if it's too difficult, a lot of managers will revert back to type. It's easier to go back to what we were used to rather than stick with where we are currently at. Hybrid hasn't been easy for a lot of organizations, I understand that, but a lot of organizations now have settled into 2 years of working it, so you would naturally expect them to understand where the challenges are. I think one of the biggest problems we will experience with this new hybrid model is lack of communication. I would imagine with everybody scrambling around during the pandemic and probably post pandemic restrictions being lifted, is have they actually had time, managers and leaders, to talk to their staff? Have they canvassed their troops to understand what the feeling is within their organization? If they haven't had those discussions, they won't be able to build a hybrid policy. So I would suggest that most organizations now need to get their heads together from top to bottom, talk to their employees and understand what works and what doesn't. Because if that doesn't happen, I would imagine we'll slip back into business as usual and revert to old ways. We also need to recognize, I think, that the lessons that have been learnt over the last 2 years, again, collating that data, those opinions, the values, the visions that everybody's had of their business over the last 2 years, I think need to be documented. And again, it's taking time to do that, review them, analyze, and then act on them. And take opinion from your colleagues, your employees, and your business leaders, because they're the ones that have experienced it at various levels in various different guises of hybrid working. And it will be those people that can give their experience on paper. And only then, I think, can a hybrid policy be developed for each organization. You'd also have to look carefully, I think, at other organizations and how you tie in with third parties and what their hybrid models are. Does it work for you? It might not. So I think there's a big piece to be pulled together here and a massive jigsaw amongst all organizations to look at how hybrid will work and how the policies will be developed. I think another area we need to really consider are those with hidden disabilities. It was probably easy whilst people were coming to the office, those that have hidden disabilities and any other form of disability, it was easier to communicate and understand needs whilst visibly in an office and in a working environment. I think now with hybrid working, people aren't so visible. I've certainly noticed that now with Teams meetings, most people turn their cameras off. Most people are sitting in the background, if they're there at all. So I think the lack of visibility now is going to cause all sorts of issues as regards managing and understanding people with disabilities. And there will be people that have, over the last 2 years, had disabilities come out of the woodwork. So I think we need to be conscious of that and build that into any models we have. We also need to be conscious of culture shifts. I think there's a new culture. If there isn't already, you will see that developing within your own organizations. The culture you had 2 years ago will not be the same culture now. And I think if we're not careful how we talk to our employees and our senior management, we will very quickly move back into an old style culture. When everything's shifted over the last 2 years, I think if we don't embrace that now and look at the new cultures, we will just shift back to BAU. And I'm sure we don't want that. We need to build resilience into the strategies and methodologies. We need to look at ways of coping if this ever happens again. It might not be COVID, it could be something else that impacts us. And I think we need to look at that very carefully as well. So within your hybrid policies, I also think we need to look and build that resilience in should anything happen in the future, that we have that to fall back on rather than just accept that this is a one-off. And finally, I think we need to trust our employees. We've done that for 2 years now. We told them to get on with it. We told them to work from home. They've done that. Performance is improving in a lot of organizations. Feedback has been shown that through various studies done. 80% of managers prefer the hybrid working model. So I think now we need to build that trust into allowing a hybrid model to work and enabling employees to work it. That's it, Ian.
No, fabulous. Thanks, Phil. Yeah, look, so adding to what Phil's very astutely said there, for me personally, I think the biggest challenge we as managers have in response to hybrid working is around employee well-being. You know, how we develop the right level of trust between ourselves, our superiors and subordinates, you know, to enable the necessary transparency in our day-to-day communications to properly look out for each other. That's going to be critical in successfully implementing a hybrid working environment. You know, I think empathy can be very difficult to convey through video conferencing, and it is a lot more difficult to notice some of those small behavioural changes that might indicate a problem in the virtual environment. So developing that trust to enable that more transparent communication about our own well-being is going to be just so important to making this successful. You know, one of the things I've been doing with my colleagues and staff is to be in regular communication with them and to be completely open and honest about how I'm doing, you know, when I'm struggling, and also to try and schedule in some time into the diary where I can just talk to people, you know, to build better relationships away from a working context, sort of water cooler moments, if you will, you know, to build that trust, create a scenario where they can feel comfortable coming to me and, you know, talking to me about non-working matters or concerns. And sort of finally, maybe picking up again on one of Phil's first comments there in response to where I see the biggest barriers to hybrid working. Again, it's institutional habit. I think there's a real risk that we start to default back to a workplace-based model because that's what we are societally comfortable with. But we need to be brave and avoid falling into a, you know, better the devil you know attitude to allow us to fix the parts of working life that didn't really work pre-pandemic. And I think actually that leads me quite neatly into the question I was going to address here, which is hybrid working creating a two-tier workforce, and will those who are present in the office be given more opportunities than their physically remote colleagues, and how should we acknowledge individual circumstances to avoid or mitigate against this? So I suppose splitting the question into three parts. First of all, my response to the first part is hybrid working creating a two-tier workforce. In my experience, so far, I don't think so. I do believe the risk of a two-tier workforce is created, or that is real, and it is something that we have to be mindful of and actively consider as managers. You know, I do fully accept and understand that women undertake the majority of childcare duties, and actually I think other caring responsibilities and duties for that matter. And there is a risk, therefore, that we see a male-dominated workplace-based workforce with a larger female contingent choosing to work largely from away from the office. I do also recognise, as sort of Phil's touched on already, that those with disabilities or long-term physical or mental health conditions are more likely to work from home, and that those in ethnic minorities may also feel uncomfortable in a sort of white male-dominated workplace. However, as long as we as managers can develop and nurture that clear communication of expectations and accountability within our staff, I think we will build the trust and support that they need to prosper in the scenario we are not all office based 100% of the time. You know, furthermore, I actually think that a one size fits all approach of having an entirely office based staff is more likely to discriminate against your employees by removing their choices on how and where they want to work to maximize their productivity. I think that implementing a hybrid working scenario, you're more likely to create an environment for your staff that they feel comfortable in, can thrive in better, and move away from the multi-tiered workforce that a one-size-fits-all approach risks you having. So, sort of touching then maybe on the second part of the question of, will those who are present in the office be given more opportunities than their physically remote colleagues? Again, I don't think so. And it's certainly something that's being backed up by what I'm seeing within my company. If anything, I would say that the pandemic has resulted in a far more geographically agnostic approach to the way in which we've been resourcing our clients' needs, which has increased the opportunities for those working remotely by being able to select the best people for the job from our UK and global resource base over the perhaps the most appropriate people from a local or regional resource pool. So, by way of example, despite being based in Edinburgh, I'm involved in a significant project on Jersey and the Channel Islands. And in my core team, I've got other staff based in Edinburgh, then staff in Brighton and London and Leeds, Newcastle, Belfast, Glasgow and Bristol, which is not necessarily an opportunity or team I think pre-pandemic would have come my way. So they're just leading into the final part of the question then. How should we acknowledge individual circumstances to avoid or mitigate against the creation of a two-tiered workforce? I think that we acknowledge individual circumstances by being responsible managers and engaging with our workforce, talking to them, building a mutual trust and having that regular dialogue around their needs, the company's needs and the needs of their teams and clients to tailor working solutions that fits everyone best. I have a very young family. My wife is a hospital doctor, so I have a lot of childcare responsibilities, and I have every intention of continuing to work in a hybrid fashion, as it offers me a better balance between work and home. And that, I believe that championing hybrid working patterns ourselves and promoting regular and honest communication are going to be the cornerstones in acknowledging individual circumstances and mitigating against the creation of a two-tiered workforce. Whether you're hybrid or rigid, if your staff feel safe and confident in talking to you, as it goes a long way to avoiding the misunderstandings and feelings of resentment that can spiral quickly out of hand, perhaps where people think they're being treated unjustly and differently to others. So one final observation from me in terms of mitigation before I hand over to Kirsten for her thoughts is around probably digital equality, which I also think is going to be key. Companies need to ensure that remote staff have the same access to resources and company information as office-based staff to assist in offering equal opportunities to those within and out with the office environment, which is again something my employer in particular has been excellent at. So Kirsten, sorry, I think I've overrun a wee bit here, but it'd be great if you had any further thoughts or observations.
Thanks very much, Ian. And I think I'll just start maybe where you finished off there, because I think that the new situation that we're all dealing with at the moment has absolutely opened our minds to what's possible. We don't have to do what we've always done. And I think Phil kicked off earlier by saying that one size doesn't fit all. And I think that that's becoming much more clear to us as we try and wrestle our way forward into what work is going to look like. I think from my point of view, there is absolutely merit in being both in the office and remote. And I think it's about finding that balance, what balance works for us individually and obviously in terms of the organisations that people work for. And I've heard certainly suggestions that there might be more opportunities for people in the office, but I genuinely don't think that has to be true. I don't think it has to be a given. And I don't actually think any of this is quite that straightforward or binary. And maybe that's something that we're going to have to get our heads around as well. This is not a straightforward subject, but work was never straightforward. And maybe we're just being pushed into actually confronting that and accepting it. And I guess something else that has struck me over the pandemic period is that people in management roles, as well as people in all different kinds of roles, have been incredibly creative. People have worked really hard to find innovative ways to make work work, if you like. And I think that creativity is not going to stop. We're not going to turn that off like a tap. There will still be that ability to think creatively. And maybe people will feel a wee bit more confident in doing so. seeing what they've achieved. We have achieved what we've always thought was unachievable. So I think that there's something in there. No doubt it will take significant effort to deliver the right hybrid system for every organisation where that will work. And of course, it is a very individual situation that'll have to be judged. But I think that it is worth doing. I think that managers use the skills day and daily that are these same skills that will make this work. It's just not something that we've potentially considered in such a big way before. So I think that there'll be a real benefit for organisations, but also for individual members of staff if we do this. I think that the comments about communications, which have been made so far, are absolutely on the money. Communications is going to be absolutely vital. All of the ways that we have found to communicate. We've heard about Teams calls. There are so many things that I'm doing now and my team are doing now that I think are a good example of that. That's a team that formed in the initial pandemic period. So many of my team had not met each other until recently for good health and safety reasons. So a team that was formed in a very pressing and pressured environment, we had to find ways to make this work for us. So Teams calls, Zoom calls, Slack. I didn't even know what some of these things were until very recently, but they are an absolutely integral part of how we work now. And I think that we're all the better for it. I think it really matters. I do think that the point Phil made about making sure people are engaged in that is really important, because it can't be something that people are not actually actively participating in. I think that there is a need for us to make sure that there is good two-way communication. But certainly, I've seen myself doing things like having staff meetings in parks. I would have never contemplated doing something like that. I would have thought that was maybe a wee bit loopy. But we do need to be a little bit creative in making sure that we make this work for the individuals concerned, because that is what will make it work for the organisation too. And I guess the final thing I want to do is maybe just to reflect on something that you said. I think that equality and diversity really matter in all of this. So the comments about one size fits all approaches not working, I think have to be right at the heart of this. I think that that's a really restrictive way for us to go forward, and it's not even realistic just now. But if we are restricting opportunities for people, then we are actually restricting opportunities for organisations to succeed. You will have a smaller pool, and this is obviously the HR director in me coming out, but a smaller pool of really good candidates is not a good thing for any organisation. You want to be able to recruit and retain the best people, and having the ability to develop the right hybrid working policy for any organisation in a fair way that means that there isn't that disparity of treatment, I think is absolutely central to that. So I think that it's not what any of us would have chosen for a working experience over the last couple of years, but I think that there is the opportunity, and I think that we should really grasp it to deliver something that works better for everyone. So I think I'll better move on now, because I think I've gone on for too long as well. It's such an interesting topic into the conversation that I'm meant to be having, or the question that I'm meant to be answering, which is about what challenges managers and leaders have in response to hybrid working and maintaining healthy boundaries around work-life balance. And I think that that's actually a really important point for people in managerial and leadership roles to take on board, because I think that anybody who's been managing remote teams or trying to make work happen, in an appropriate and constructive way over the last couple of years will have absolutely wrestled with this. And so the role of managers is really important, and that ability to have a balance applies equally as much to managers as it does to the people who are part of their teams. And I guess that the starting point for me in all of this is that it's really sensible and entirely reasonable to sort of take a step back and think this is all new and it's all different, and it's okay to be kind of feeling your way forward. Nobody has all the answers on this. Nobody has some kind of perfect recipe for hybrid working, or nor did people for remote working either. But we have to think about that with the boundaries in terms of a sensible work-life balance. What kind of communications are we looking to have, and when, in our minds? So I think that the notion that this is an organisationally specific discussion or conversation, which is where Phil came in, is a really important one, because what works for organisation 1 may not work for organisation 2. There can be lots of useful conversations that happen about how to make things as well balanced as possible that you may take from other organisations. But I think that we need to all be realistic about the individual and unique nature of the different companies that people work in. And I think we need to be frank as well that there will be challenges. And I think one of these challenges is making sure that these boundaries are there and that they are in place in a way that does work for people. I think that ultimately that's worthwhile. Ian said earlier that this was all about making sure that it works in the context of employee well-being, and that has to be fundamental to this. Otherwise, why on earth would you do it in the first place? And I was listening to the radio earlier in the week, actually. There was somebody on Radio Scotland who was talking about their experience, and it was of remote working, I think. But I think the point works whether it's remote or hybrid. And what they were doing is that they were doing their commute to work. But what they were meaning by that is that they were spending the time they would normally have commuted walking. So they went out in the morning and they walked for the duration of their commute. And they worked in a circle, came back, sat down at their desk and did their day's work. And they were chuffed because they didn't necessarily have to do the evening commute. And I thought that's a really creative way of looking at that. Now, people have got different responsibilities. That's not going to be the right answer for everyone. But that's certainly going to be good for that person's well-being. There'll be a clear boundary there. I suspect they won't be able to answer emails when they're busy out on their walking commute, and their colleagues will be aware of that. So I think that kind of creative thinking and encouraging that kind of creative thinking in managers as well as team members is important. And I know that, thinking about all of this, it's not necessarily the case that everyone can work in a hybrid setting. You mentioned that your wife is a hospital doctor. Plainly, there's an awful lot of that can't be done in a hybrid setting. But if we look at some of the roles where it is much more possible, I think that there'll be teams like mine who experienced a work bed routine for a number of months during the teeth of the pandemic. And we need to make sure that that isn't what remote working or hybrid working looks like, because although that might be what had to happen at that particular time, we can do better than that. And I think we can do better than that. And that focus on making work for people, I think, is really important. And that applies to managers just as well as it does to everybody else. So it's the same old chestnut that we used to wrestle with of, who wants to leave the office first? Nobody wants to be seen to leave their desk first, as if that had some correlation to the effectiveness of you in your workplace, which of course it didn't. And it's that same situation in terms of availability. So I think that notion of communications, taking that into account, making sure that there's a two-way dialogue and a review of what's working and what isn't. And I think that that's quite well covered on the CMI website. Actually, I thought that was quite a sensible point to be focused on, that we need to keep talking about it. That dialogue is really important, and it has to be a two-way street. I think that awareness of people's commitments as well, and that means your own commitments too, is going to be really important in making it work. So we have to ask ourselves the same questions that we would ask other people. We have to think that this is worth it. And I absolutely do think it's worth it, making sure that we don't just fall back into whatever used to happen just because it's what used to happen, I think is absolutely worth doing. And fundamentally, yes, of course, it's about well-being, but it can also be about productivity. And I think that that's a really useful way for us to consider this. There's an interesting study referenced, again, on the CMI website about the links between the levels of trust and the levels of productivity within teams. And obviously, trust is really important if you're going to be having a hybrid working system. If you just take a wee step back, trust is important anyway. We should trust our teams. We've got teams that are there to do a job. We need to trust them to go on and do it. And if trusting them in a hybrid system means a higher level of productivity, then that's surely a gain for everyone. And just to conclude, I think that notion of diversity also is really vital here. That bigger talent pool, but also that better understanding of your customers is potentially a gain that comes from all of that. And just to draw that all to a close, what I think we must not do is just to go back to where we were. I think we need to allow our preconceptions about work to be challenged. The future of work won't be what it was in the past. Even if we want it to be, I think we probably need to recognise that neither the employees of today nor the employees of the future are going to be up for that. So I think it'd be much better to lead that conversation from the front and to try and make it work for all of us. But that's plenty for me, I think. So I'm going to hand back to you, Phil.
Thanks, Kirsten. Some very good points there. Based on what the audience is actually hearing now, I'd like to pose a question slightly off tangent. We're going to put a poll up, and what I'd like you to answer is whether you feel now, having heard from the panel, whether hybrid working for you and your organization is a go or whether it isn't. So if you could do that poll, please, and we'll have a look at that at the end and just see what your figures are like. I'm going to pick up a couple of points you've mentioned there, Kirsten, very important points. Working routines. A lot of people now for 2 years have had forced working routines, been told to work from home. And from experience, I know of 2 employees that have actually moved jobs because they were forced back into an office environment. They'd got used to working from home, and they sought out an employer that was offering a hybrid working model, and they've subsequently gone. I think it's very important to understand employees, how they've had to manage the 2 years and look at their own home life balanced into their work life. Most people will probably have found some way of dealing with their mental health, whether it's buying a pet, whether it's having a child and brought them into the world, 2-year-old now, and they've got all those responsibilities to consider. And the last thing they need is a business saying, we're now going back to old ways, you're in the office, because they've now established set routines. I think we need to be very conscious as managers and leaders that those conversations need to be had. Mental health, very key. One employee I'm very conscious of took a very bad turn when this individual for 2 years had been working from home, and actually she got presented an award for her improved productivity and was the best employee over the 2 years because that model suited her. Shortly after restrictions lifted, asked to go back into the office, and her mental health dropped, her productivity dropped, and she was on a disciplinary. So I think we need to look very carefully as managers and leaders on what suits the employee and what suits the organization. And ultimately, every organization is looking at productivity and output. If you have an employer that isn't outputting based on the last 2 years, I think that careful conversation and needs need to be understood and discussed. But if you've got an employer that's producing, why shake the apple cart? Because ultimately what you could do is upset the status quo. And I think finally on that, I think one of the biggest barriers we're going to find to hybrid working is the differential, touching on that kind of 2-tier, those that have to go into the office and those that can work from home. We're all human beings. We all have a degree of resentment. And I think as managers and leaders, we need to be very conscious of what's going on within our teams and monitor that very carefully. Because the last thing we want is our teams, good working, focused teams falling out because one person could do one thing and another can do another. So I think catching up, and I'm conscious of time, the poll should hopefully be open now. There was probably a slight lag in when I posed the question. So please use the poll. Where do we go next? Let's have a quick look on our agenda. So I think we are currently time-wise. Kirsten, have you any questions for Kirsten from the panel or from our guests? We've got her here now. Let's use this time wisely.
Yeah, Phil. So there is one that's definitely good to get Kirsten's input on, and that's how do you manage introducing hybrid working in an environment which already has flexible working arrangements, for example, not a 9-to-5 office job, which I think with your Westminster, put my teeth in, with your Westminster obligations is something that we're really interested to hear about too.
Yeah, that's a very specific working environment, certainly. So it certainly isn't a 9-to-5 kind of working environment. And in fact, in reality, people can often be expected, and this is members of staff I'm talking about, not MPs, members of staff can often be expected to be available and be working up till midnight in a situation where you might not have known the day before, or even until midnight, in fact, that was going to be required of you. So it's a very particular setting, and that might seem a little bit extreme as an example, but there will be lots of different environments where they have their own ways of working necessitated by the business need, which are not a straightforward office environment. And, we are certainly absolutely looking at this now. The situation in Westminster currently is that MPs are not permitted to work in a hybrid manner any longer. So we need to be there. But that does not, of course, mean that staff members need to be there. And I think that, again, that goes back to some of the earlier discussions. What is the actual need? So if people have been in a position to be supported by remote staff for a lengthy period of time, it strikes me that we have to learn from that. And that's certainly what we're looking to do, and to take on board the fact that people have been able to provide a significant degree of support without being in the same place. So that notion of staff involvement, which we've heard about, is certainly driving us forward in our discussions. We'll be looking to rota people in a way that means that we get the support that we need, but only in a way that brings them in when it's necessary to bring people in. So it's not necessary for people to be sitting in a Westminster office on a Friday when there are almost no MPs there on a Friday because they're away in their constituencies. But we can go much further than that, and I think that drive to go much further than that is something that every organisation will face, whether they work in a slightly weird and wonderful setting like Westminster where it is so unpredictable. But I think, or something a little bit more routine. But I think that the questions that are really needing to be answered by all of us are the same. Can we do it, and should we do it? And it strikes me that if there's not a good reason for not trying to be more flexible and adopt some kind of hybrid approach, when we know that so many things have been possible over the last couple of years, I think really that we're missing a really, really important element of what I think the future of work will encompass.
Thank you, Kirsten. Okay, looking at our time, I'd like to now consider some questions from our audience. If we can get some of those questions up, and then we can see what our guests are saying. So, pre-submitted question from Lewis, directed to Kirsten. How does hybrid working differ from flexible remote working? Kirsten,
that's a really good question. And, to be honest, I think that there might not be an entirely straightforward answer to that. Maybe that goes back to the comments that I think all of us have made about communication being really important, because whatever it means, you have to be pretty clear that both the team members, the managers, and the organisation as a whole are all united in their understanding of what it means in any particular business. I think for myself, hybrid working has to have these elements of sometimes being in the office or in the working environment, and sometimes working away from there. I was going to say at home, but of course it doesn't have to be at home, does it? That might be part of the discussion that you have with people. It certainly strikes me that you don't always have to be either in the office or at home. Maybe you'd be in the office and be somewhere else where you're perfectly able to work, whether that be a coffee shop, whether it be your granny's house. I think that the whole point of this really is that it does fit in a little bit better with your life. So I think it's about the outcomes and that clarity that people should have together.
Okay. Ian, do you want to embroider on anything that Kirsten has given us?
Yeah, I think it's a really tricky one to answer. Maybe the difference for me between hybrid and flexible is hybrid is around where you choose to work, and flexible is around when you choose to work. So you can have a flexible system within a hybrid system, but you don't necessarily have, just because you can be hybrid but still stick to that more rigid.
Yeah. Okay. One observation from me probably, and how I'd see flexible working from what I've experienced to hybrid now, is flexible was probably more your psychological contract between your boss and your employee. There was a one-to-one, suited personal arrangements. You didn't often see too many, certainly in my organisation, you didn't see too many of those happening. Hybrid now, I think, has been a forced organisational move, so it affects far more employees. And I would probably suggest the difference between flexible and hybrid is flexible is one-to-one, hybrid is more organisational. Good. Okay. Pre-submitted question from Catherine, directed to Ian. What are your thoughts on employees that have settled into 100% working from home basis and are reluctant now to re-engage with the office environment?
Great question, Catherine, as I would say that I'm one of those people who have been quite reluctant to re-engage in the office environment. I think it has to come down to finding that right balance between your needs as an individual, your employer's needs, your clients' needs where appropriate, and the needs of your team. I do have an obligation to some of my staff that requires me to be in the office. I've got an obligation to my employer that requires me to be in the office. So whilst I'm reticent to do this, it's part of finding that right balance and that right compromise between home and work life that works best for everyone. I think so. Yeah, I think it's okay to be hesitant to go back, but you've got to do it with a balance.
Kirsten, you want to add anything on to what Ian said?
Yeah, I think that's really interesting, actually, to hear Ian saying that, he himself feels a bit like that. And I think that it's really fundamental for finding a sensible way forward, that we do appreciate that people will be a little bit anxious about this. People have had a huge change thrust upon them with absolutely no ability to control what's happening in many situations. And we shouldn't underestimate the impact that has on people in terms of their own well-being. And of course, that has a relationship to their work and their ability to work. So I think that certainly two-way dialogue is really important. If you need to be back in the office sometimes, then, that's one of these things, I guess. But, have we thought that through? Do people really need to be back in? And if they do, how do we best facilitate that in a way that is understanding of the fact that it is yet another big change that's being thrust upon them? And the better that we can talk about that, the better it will work when people are back in whatever hybrid system.
Yeah, good. Excellent. One thought for me was with employees working 100% from home, I think it's understanding the reasons why there's a reluctance. Personally, having been 2 years working from home, I had to do some training and go back onto a railway depot, and I was anxious the night before, I don't mind admitting, of going back in to an environment of traveling by train, into a railway depot full of people, and there was a degree of anxiety. Now, if I had the choice, I would have chosen to stay at home. But I'll be honest, once I got to the depot and I met fellow colleagues and everything else, those soon disappeared, and actually I enjoyed myself back out. And it was very much like getting back to the old kind of communication and the old way of doing business. So I would say, encourage anybody, if they are reluctant, at least take 1 day a week back in the office and slowly blend them back into whatever hybrid policy you may have. Okay, another question from Richard to myself. How do organizations support leaders with their well-being, as leaders are expected to support others, often with little support for themselves? Brilliant question, Richard. Welcome to the CMI. That's what we're here for. There is a wealth of talent through the CMI network across the UK and abroad. There are very experienced managers in all organizations. Some will have been members of the CMI, some will have been, through the chartered management process. There are a lot of good experienced managers, and I would suggest that any manager or leader that's struggling, they need to speak up. They need to shout out and converse with their colleagues. And if they don't feel comfortable, there are all sorts of institutions that can provide advice, help, and just guidance in what is an unusual state of affairs now that we find ourselves in. We are learning as managers. We are constantly looking through various journals, reports, to keep up to date on what's happening. It's about engaging with the teams. It's about understanding what's going on. And I think, touching on what we said earlier on, communication is pivotal. We can't shut down in silos. We can't close down as individuals. We need to express our feelings, because, as I've just said there, I had anxieties. I needed to speak out, and I needed my boss to understand how I was feeling. So I think, don't shut down, don't close it in. We're all guilty of it sometimes as managers, that we don't want to share. But what I've learned as an effective manager, it's the sharing is the caring. And when you express that you have said feelings and anxieties and everything else, it helps put others in a better place for managing. So hopefully that answers some of the question there for you, Richard. Okay, do we have any more questions before we go on to the final part of the session?
I wonder if I can maybe come in there, Phil, just on the back.
Certainly, Kirsten. That's fire away.
Because I thought that was really insightful about making sure that people understand that, everybody has the same views and feelings. And, whilst you might have a management role and that has particular duties that it requires you to undertake, it doesn't mean that you don't have the same concerns and emotions and feelings as somebody in any other job role. And in fact, if you actually engage and proactively engage with others, whether it be peers, whether it be people that are members of the same kind of organization as you, there's lots of different people that are actually probably having the same challenges, having the same concerns, and perhaps if you do put yourself out there and say, I'm a bit concerned about this, or, I need a little bit of help managing my well-being in this very new and challenging situation, then not only might you actually benefit directly and personally from that, but there's a learning element to that as well. And if your team see that you are willing to say, that you're feeling in, the same way as them, or to ask for assistance or to ask their opinion about that, then, I think, again, that kind of communication is probably quite powerful, and it's going to be much more important as we move forward in this kind of hybrid situation, because working in a very closed kind of environment is just not going to be possible.
Kirsten, thank you. And that actually nicely wraps us up into the final part of this session. I want to thank everybody for coming on this panel today, and in particular you, Kirsten, for giving up your valuable time to come here and give your insight. And I think we all agree it's been beneficial for all of us to have that shared experience. So thank you. The poll results are in, and you won't be surprised to know that 96% of attendees, those that voted, that is, you'll know this one, Kirsten, those that voted, 96% have said a thumbs up to hybrid working. So my message to everybody out there, leaders, managers, employees, everybody, make it work. Hybrid's here, I think, and if we work it and trust it and have good policies in place and keep communicating, I think we can make that work. So thank you, group. I'm just having a quick look through where we are now. Any more questions before we wrap up? Open to the floor and open to the audience.
I think that might be us, Phil.
Okay.
Yeah, I think we're there's a lot of interaction going on, and thank you everybody. That I think, yeah, we're out of time for more questions, unfortunately, but yeah, we could have talked about it all evening. It's been brilliant. Thank you to everyone who joined us, and thank you, Kirsten, Phil and Ian, for your insights and expertise. If you're a member of CMI, don't forget to log into Management Direct using the link in the live chat, and you can find a wide range of exclusive and practical development resources and much more. If you're not yet a member, you can join our community via the link in the live chat to gain full access to Management Direct, and also sign up to the free CMI newsletter. Please take a few moments of your time to complete the feedback from today's event in the chat box. And don't forget to join us on the 27th of October for our next CMI Scotland event, Change for the Better. Again, the link will be available in the live chat and in the follow-up information we send you. So thank you again, everybody, and enjoy the rest of your evening.
Thanks, team.
Thanks.